I would say, as people are continuing to dial in, I can already start maybe with my introduction because it's a longer one maybe than usual. Given that we have somebody with a long-standing career in the tech industry in Silicon Valley and beyond, I think now in Arkansas, right?
Yep.
Um, which probably is not your background though, but I hear it is very green. I did check
It
Google
is.
Images, and I also
It is
checked out
quite nice here. Yeah.
the museum that you were talking about in another video. We'll get to that maybe in a bit, but I'm really happy and proud to present today Phil Libin. There, some of you, or probably many of you, have used products that Phil has built in the past. He's really a legendary Silicon Valley founder and investor. With Evernote, not only managed to assemble more than hundreds of millions of users, but your LinkedIn, Phil, says that your role was assembling a brilliant and hardworking group of people, then making sure that they have enough coffee to change the world.
And I
And
don't
I
have to
keep
worry about the coffee anymore. So it's my life is much easier.
exactly. And I keep referring to your LinkedIn titles here. As a managing director at General Catalyst Venture Capital, you were investing in startups that try to make the world more like Star Trek. You're currently mostly making demo videos at mmhmm, where your actual title is CEO and co-founder of All Turtles and mmhmm. So my first question, goes to sort of the way that I see you describing your own career with all the sort of pressure and responsibility that comes with founding a company. How does one keep the humor and stay humble when successes do pour in, like, you've been enjoying over the last years?
Well, I mean, it's easy to stay humble. I'm constantly in the company of people who have accomplished much more than I have, and who are just much more impressive. So I think I don't know. Kind of feels like if you have to work towards humility, you're probably doing something wrong. It's just that's just the natural state of the world. Yeah, the humor is tougher. It is a hard. It is a difficult thing to do. Starting companies, running companies, I would not recommend it to anyone. But I guess it beats having a job.
And it is an important in sort of part of, also building culture, I guess, for
Yeah, I think. Well, with we're really just trying to inject some personality and some fun into video communications, because I think most people's first experience of being on video was being on a Zoom call during the pandemic. Everyone has seen videos, of course, but most of us haven't been on a video very much, other than Zoom. And I think people have this association of video being very dry and boring and kind of tedious. And of course, that's not about video, that's about meetings. But that's how people have been conditioned just in the past couple of years. So we're really trying to reverse that, to show people that actually being in video can be very expressive and delightful, and it doesn't have to be the most tedious part of your day.
And I read that you believe that after the pandemic, we shouldn't strive to go back to sort of how we used to work, but rather we should consider how we should be working. And I wonder, how and now also O, I hope I pronounced them right. Your team was great
Yeah.
in telling me, seek to kind of seize that zeitgeist, right? That change that we've all been through during the pandemic. With all, I mean everybody in this call, obviously not everybody, but people in this, let's say, tech startup knowledge economy that were able to work from home or distributed or remotely. So how do your products kind of seek that zeitgeist, and what's your long-term vision on how people are going to work in the knowledge economy?
Yeah, I think it's a very human thing to focus on the problems, focus on what's worse, kind of feel nostalgia and miss what used to be before. I think it's kind of fundamentally the way almost everyone is, certainly the way I am. And so it's pretty attractive to think about going back, but really there's never a going back. There's nothing worth going back to. things weren't very good to begin with. It's more interesting and in many ways easier to think about moving forward. So the pandemic was was a very big change. Everything's different, and of course during the beginning of the pandemic, or even the first several months, maybe the first year, things were really very bad for many people, and it was hard to see the silver linings, the few things that were actually a little bit better. But we really tried that. We really tried to force ourselves to focus on looking at the things that are better in a period of extreme change, and then seeing, well, how can we make them even better? How can we amplify the stuff that's good, rather than purely thinking about how to overcome the problems and how to go back to a previous time? How do we lean in more into the stuff that's actually working? And now it's been a year and a half, almost 2 years. There's a lot of stuff that's a lot better, and we can continue to amplify. We can continue to make things even better. So I think we do explicitly try to have this posture of rigorous optimism, where we say the world can be improved, the world can be made better, but it isn't just going to happen. It's kind of our job to do it. We have to have a plan. We have to force ourselves to do it. We have to execute, and then it's possible.
And now that people kind of have dialed in, I just want to maybe briefly remind everybody of kind of the structure of the next hour that we have with you here, Phil. So this is, of course, the first cohort group of our cohort-based learning platform. As we, as a conference/festival business, we're also pivoting into a new product that is more adapted, kind of making use of those changes. And this half an hour where we'll be speaking, you and me, we will then stream across our platforms and newsletters and social media, etc. Versus then the latter half an hour, we'll have kind of a Q&A with the founders in the cohort and yourself, which we'll keep private. So having watched the interview that you recently gave, I kind of listened to your style of working at the moment. You moved to Arkansas. You say you have a third of your time that you work at home, another third you go out to places like museum. There it is. You work from a museum, you work from a club where there's a pool, then sometimes you take a dip in the pool between a call and a meeting and so forth. And I was just like very inspired by this way of working. And I'm personally also a true believer that for many startups, this is a possible scenario. However, I have encountered that not everybody wants that. And I wonder, in your organization, what's the percentage of people, or do you have to really just hire people that also want to work in distributed companies?
Yeah, I mean, we hire people that want to work in distributed companies, and we're very upfront about that. I mean, in the interview process, we say we're fully dedicated to being out of office. Mm-hmm. We're fully distributed. There's never going to be a central office, and that means a lot of things. And we're trying to get really good at that. We're not distributed because we don't know how to be in an office. We're distributed because it's better, right? We've intentionally chosen to be distributed. Our first rule is no one is remote. We don't talk about, we're not remote work, because I think when you think about remote, you get this image. You get the image of being isolated, that like other people are gathered somewhere and have advantages and are having fun and being productive, but you're not. So we're not remote, we're distributed. And the difference is a very big one. It's one of intentionality. It's like when, the people who made the internet, who designed the internet, were designing the internet, they made it a fundamentally distributed system, right? And it isn't because like they didn't know how to make a centralized network. And lots of things are harder because the internet is distributed, right? Many things would be easier if there was like one big computer somewhere that ran the internet. But I think people just intuitively understand that like the internet can't be centralized. It couldn't exist, right? It's because being distributed gives a system some really significant advantages, some really significant superpowers. And it can give companies the same kind of superpowers, but we have to design it intentionally. So we were remote in the beginning of the pandemic because we were forced to, with no preparation. Maybe in April, we were remote. But after that, we became distributed, meaning we designed ourselves to be distributed for the advantages. And of course, we only want to hire people who want that, who love that, and not everyone does. And that's great, because I don't need to hire everyone. I just need, you know, a few thousand really brilliant people who like this lifestyle, because it does give you superpowers.
And, you know, just to give you maybe some more context on, you know, lots of people in our community are sort of, you know, early stage founders, and you having started many companies, you know, specifically being, you know, very product genius in, you know, the creativity. And we've just seen an example of in the background. So if people are wondering, you know, why there's, you know, this great images and you know, GIFs kind of appearing in the background. That's the actual product. With you raised actually over 100 million. But said that it started as a joke.
Yeah.
So how does one get from a joke and an idea that one maybe discusses with their closest peers and friends to a product that has legs? And how do you know which idea to pursue? Like, how's your process there?
Well, we have we have a couple of kind of filters that we look at All Turtles. All Turtles is a studio from which you know, came and a few other things. Basically, we have 4 criteria in order for us to work on something. It has to solve a real problem. So that's the first thing. It's like we only work on things that solve real problems. So you have to say what the problem is, and then you have to point to like actual living people who are alive right now who have this problem. It can't be like a hypothetical future problem. And you have to quantify what the impact of the problem is. What is the problem actually? Like what's the cost of it? What will be the impact of fixing it? And we won't work on anything unless it's like that. And just that criteria, just like forcing ourselves to only look at real problems and say out loud what the problem is and who has the problem, eliminates like 99% of ideas. Because almost all ideas aren't real problems or some kind of invented thing. Then we say, okay, well, who's going to be the founder? Who are the founders? We want the founders to be people who are in love with this problem, who really like understood it. We want to make sure that it has a direct revenue model. So we were only allowed to make money in a very 18th century model where we only make money by charging for our products. Like we make money from people and companies decide to pay us because they want to use our products. We don't allow advertising, data collection, anything like that. And then most importantly, kind of the 4th criteria is the timing window, which is we only want to work on things that we think we can for real bring to market in about 12 to 18 months, you know, like a year and a half maximum until it's like a real product. Just because we're not set up to be efficient at longer term. You know, if we have to work for 5 years before we even ship the first version, we're not set up to do that. So we have to do something that can be for real brought to market in 12 to 18 months in a way that would have been impossible 2 years ago. So we have something important has to have changed in the world in the past couple of years that makes this potential solution go from being crazy, like impossible to really do a couple of years ago, but now it's actually possible. So like what's different? What's changed in the world? So everything we work on at All Turtles has something like that, something that's changed. In mmhmm's case, it was the technology. There's just a lot better machine vision, machine learning, video, APIs, technology than there were a few years ago. It would have been very hard to do this a few years ago. But also the world changed because, you know, we could have done it a few years ago, but who would have cared? But COVID was such a sharp change in the world that it made those possible. So that's the framework. So yeah, there's lots of ideas, lots of jokes. 99% of them never make it past even the first filter, and maybe 1 in 1,000 makes it through all 4. And then those are the ones we work on.
Market size? Your VC? No, you managed to go through years of VC without kind of adapting that as sort of a core criteria of the framework.
Yeah, market size is a really stupid metric. I've actually never put together a TAM, total addressable market slide ever in my life. And I don't think I've ever allowed someone to complete presenting one to me, just because like I'm like offended by the idea that like, you know, there's basically for early stage. Now, later stage is different. If I'm doing like public company investment, you know, which I don't do because I'm not good at it. But for later stage stuff, sure, maybe you think about the total addressable market. For early stage stuff, there's only 2 types, right? Either the market is big enough or it's not big enough. And I have to feel that, and you have to feel it. And there's no there's no numbers that are they're gonna get there. So yeah, so we don't really care about how big something is. My former partner at John Catalyst, a friend of mine, a guy named Hemant Taneja, he wrote a book called Unscaled. It's a really good book. He basically, his main hypothesis was that in the past, it used to be that a company had to get big before it could have impact, because in order for, like, in the kind of before the internet times, the company had to get big so that it could have economies of scale, so that it could have efficient distribution and manufacturing and all of that stuff, because like that took size. So first you have to get big, and then you can have like an impact. But platforms, the internet technology has really inverted that. So now a startup can get to impact first. So first, you solve a problem. First, you make a difference. First, you like make a significant improvement in someone's life. You do that first. And then you can decide how many someones can you help? How big should you get? Mm-hmm. So you go impact first, and then you start thinking about scale. So it's like the opposite of like blitz scaling and all of this other like Silicon Valley startup crap that people talk about. And yeah, we've never thought about market size.
Reminds me a little bit of what Y Combinator founder Paul Graham talks about when he says that, it's in an early stage of finding product market fit. It's not as much about, thinking about why are not more people using my product, but rather thinking about who is using my product and how can I find more such people.
Yeah. How do you, like, the way our process for this is we want to be indispensable. Mm-hmm. So the question is, who are we indispensable for? Like, whose lives are materially better because our product exists in their lives? Is there anyone like that? Is there any person? Are there 30 people like that? And in an early stage, for example, very early, like right when we had the closed beta, I set a criteria where I said I want 30 people, just 30, that for whom we are having a very high, profound impact on their lives. Mm-hmm. Like something about their lives and their work is better, significantly better, because we exist. I only want 30 of those. And I just need to talk to 30 of those people. Like I need to have a conversation with 30 people who tell me this. This is how am I going to know if it has a big impact? Well, I'm going to believe them. I'm just going to talk to them. And if they tell me, and if they explain how, I'm going to believe it. And that was it. And then we had 30, and then we said, okay, well, now can we have a few hundred? And I'm not going to talk to a few hundred people because, kind of don't like people that much. But, once we had kind of talked to 30, we figured out what they look like and other people could talk to them. And then we had, a few thousand and so on. So yeah, so we always try to say with like, how do we get that impact first? And then once we have the impact, how big should it get?
Is it okay to defer kind of payment and price in that very early, having that 30, first users? Or do you think, in order to build something with product market fit, these 30 need to pay already?
I mean, everything's okay. What I like to do is, I think like if you're thinking about, doing like an A round or something, or kind of your next round of funding, whatever your next round of funding is, there's basically like there's really four like places that you could be for revenue. The best place is you have a lot of revenue, and it's like the correct kind of revenue. It's like you're saying you're a SaaS business, you're going to raise money, and you're like, here's, we have $100 million of annualized recurring SaaS revenue, and it's high margins, and it's the right kind, and it's growing by 100% year over year. Great.
5% churn.
That's the best if you can get there. Very unlikely at your seed stage or 8th stage you're gonna be that. Mm-hmm. The second best is you say we have no revenue, but we know how we're going to have revenue. Here's our plan. Like we know what we're going to do. We've just chosen not to do it yet. Mm-hmm. That's also pretty good. Mm-hmm. And either of those two is good. The two that are bad, the third one that isn't very good at all is to say we don't have any revenue and we don't know how we're going to do it. We haven't really thought about it. We don't have a plan. That's a little bit dangerous, but sometimes it's acceptable. And then the worst one is we have some revenue, but it's the wrong kind. like, oh, we're funding the company now by being consultants, and we have these like early customers who are paying us for custom work, but we know really that that's not really going to be the way that it goes forward, because like the worst thing, like the worst revenue is much worse than no revenue, because the wrong revenue comes with all sorts of strings attached and limitations from an investor's point of view. If you don't care about investors, then there's no such thing as the wrong revenue. Then revenue is just revenue. But if you're trying to appeal to investors, then I would say best case is have the right kind of revenue and have a lot of it. Second best case is don't have any revenue, but have a good plan for how you're going to get it. Third worst is don't even have a plan. And then the worst possible is have the wrong kind of revenue.
And there's obviously literature around it, and we're taking people through the frameworks of product market fit. But from your perspective,
literature is way too generous a way to describe it. It's not literature. It's like there's a lot of stuff.
A lot of blog posts.
Not a lot of it raises to the level of literature.
That's a good one. For you, like, is there that one kind of metric that you really look for, to somewhat try to quantify product market fit at a later stage? You described the early stage, the interviews with the 30 folks. Is it NPS after, or, what are you really looking for?
So I think it's actually pretty important not to have overly narrow measurements. Because I think whenever you set up a system, and I think this is a big problem with Silicon Valley, or kind of Silicon Valley mindset, is whenever you try to optimize for some number, chances are you're going to make everything else worse. And you can always improve a number, but if your success criteria is a narrow point of optimization, you're probably going to make everything else worse overall, and like important things worse. And you kind of just see that in like Facebook. Like, I think part of the reason why like Facebook is such a like unhelpful presence in the world is because they really try to optimize for pretty narrow things. Compared to, let's just say, like, look at the opposite. What's like the opposite of Facebook? I think like the opposite of Facebook in many ways is Wikipedia. Like, look at Wikipedia. Wikipedia's entire budget for Wikipedia is like less than Facebook spends on, peanut butter. Right? It's tiny. But it's got a huge audience, right? In terms of how many people actually like know about Wikipedia, look at it. It's gigantic, right? It's lots and lots and lots of people. Wikipedia is completely community curated, kind of like Facebook, except even more so. Like, there's nothing on Wikipedia that's written by like Wikipedia. It's all community. And so you would think that like this like relatively small company that's actually very important, where all of the content is community based, you would think it would just be garbage. But it's not. It's like the most trusted brand on the internet. It's pretty good. Yeah, sometimes stuff gets on there, but for the most part, it's really good. Why? And Facebook, that can literally afford to spend 10,000 times more, can't get their shit together. Well, there's several reasons, but one of them is that Wikipedia doesn't have very narrow optimization functions. If you ask Wikipedia, what are you trying to optimize for? What's the number that you're trying to optimize for? They don't have a single number, because they're a nonprofit, they don't really care. Like, for example, they don't care about engagement. Like, Wikipedia doesn't care how many links you click on when you're on a page. They don't make any more money or less money. They just want you, their optimization point is a higher level thing. What they want you to is they want you to like learn something, like whatever it is that you came to Wikipedia to learn, they want to know that you succeeded in learning it. Well, how do you measure that? Well, it's not impossible, but it's not a single number. So we can have a similar mentality. We try to avoid like very narrow optimizations. So we have a theme. So we say, okay, I did this, I put together a business plan, which I've shown some people. Actually, I do have a full business plan for which we show to all the investors, and it's pretty brief. It's basically, let me see if I can find it. Oh, here
it's Excel, or
this is
a
it.
little more creative.
It's literally this slide. This is the only slide that I ever put together. This is our business plan. This is what I raised $136 million on. It's a 4-year plan. It's 1 word per year. So it's just 4 words, but it's very serious. And the idea is this is what we focus on each year. So in year 1, which ended in May, the year 1, the whole focus was start. So everyone in the company for year 1, the goal was to make something, put something in the world, make it so that there's something rather than nothing. Raise some money, hire a team, put out a product, start. That was it. We did okay. Now we're in the beginning of year 2. The whole focus of year 2 is product, meaning product market fit, meaning everyone's job is to make sure that the product actually solves real problems for real people and real companies. Like that's the job of the engineers, but it's also the job of the salespeople. It's everyone's job. So how do we measure that? Well, we have a bunch of metrics and measurements about how to do that, about, you know, indispensability. But everyone is focused on it. So there's one thing, which is product market fit, but the way it's measured is a little bit bigger. And then in about 9 months, we're going to enter year 3. And the focus on year 3 is going to be scale, reach. So we say, okay, first we put something in the world and we made sure that it's pretty good. Okay, now we need to make sure that we get it into the hands of everyone who could really benefit from it. And then in the distant, you know, science fiction future of year 4, we put something in the world, we know it's pretty good. We got into the hands of a lot of people who could benefit from it. Okay, now we need to make sure that it's profitable, make sure that it actually, you know, stands on its own. So we think about expenses and revenues. So, and I repeat this plan a lot internally with investors. So just like everyone understands what we're doing and no one is working on the wrong thing. So like right now, we're not focused on scale. Mm-hmm. So no one's job is to get more people to use mmhmm, because that's next year. Or this year's job is to make it really good, make sure it solves problems, understand who it's really good for. Why would we want to add more people until we understood what kinds of people is it really good for? Right? So this kind of sequencing is what we really try to stay disciplined on, and it's kind of it's a balance of being very focused, but not narrowly focused.
Mm-hmm. So my follow-up question then, you know, is one of my favorite questions to ask founders, because I find the answer really difficult, which is, you know, when to iterate versus to pivot, when to optimize versus, you know, go for a step change. You know, when is it to persevere with an idea that you think it just needs maybe a little bit more functional iterations versus to maybe continue on the same mission, but with a totally different product? Do you have any frameworks? Have you, you know, encountered that moment before? I'm sure you have, and how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, I think it's, I think most of the time, the stuff that we're working on, especially, you know, for startups, we as in like the larger, you know, startup community, it's okay if it fails. It's okay if it stops to exist. It's not a tragedy. If your startup fails, it's not a tragedy for the world. You don't really have an obligation to keep it alive. Assuming you've raised money from professional investors, they did not give you money so that you can lose it slowly. They didn't give you money so that you can drag out how long it's going to take to go out of business. And they didn't even give you money so that you could like have, you know, some kind of chance of returning something. They gave you money because they thought there was a small but reasonable chance of a very high impact, of a very big return. So the first thing is like pivoting or any of that kind of stuff. You don't have to do any of it. You can just fail. You can just stop. Like you can just stop working on something. When you don't think it's working out or you've changed your mind, you don't owe it to anyone to keep working on it. You owe it to people to do things cleanly and legally and make sure there's no surprises, but you shouldn't think that like, oh, I have to survive. I have to keep going. And this is actually one of the main reasons we started All Turtles, is because, you know, we were trying at All Turtles, we were mostly inspired by Netflix. You know, Netflix, if you think about it, like, and companies like Netflix, like the modern studios, they create amazingly creative shows, right? The amount of shows and movies that are Netflix and Disney and HBO and studios like this are making are like, A, there's a lot of them, and B, they're like very global. They're all over the world. And they're really creative, much more creative than like 10 years ago when there was just a few big studios that weren't doing it like this. And they make, you know, Netflix will make like several hundred pilots, you know, test shows every year. And all of the shows are like technically very good. Like they're not gonna like, your pilot isn't gonna fail at Netflix because you like didn't know what camera to use or something. Like the technical execution is excellent because it's a very professional organization. But most of the shows that they make, most of the pilots, they don't get picked up. They don't become full series. You know, you watch them and it doesn't quite work out, and they're like, okay, we're not gonna continue this. And the team who worked on this show that doesn't get picked up, like it's not the end of the world. Yeah, you're kind of disappointed. You go drinking for a weekend, you come back, and the people who are really good, they're going to stay and make 10 more pilots. So like the best people and ideas, they kind of get recycled, and the ideas that don't work out kind of go away. So we wanted the same thing. We didn't want to have like, we wanted to be able to stop working on something and have it be okay and not lose everyone. And we've done that a few times. We've had projects where, yeah, there were good projects. We like them. It wasn't going the right way. And so we just stopped. We just stopped with relatively no drama because it's not quite a company yet. It's still inside of Old Turtle. So that was a big part of it. And I think in general, like persistence is it's a little bit overrated. Like usually, oftentimes it's actually okay to stop and to give up and to do it soon enough before you've actually caused a lot of damage to yourself and to the team. Now, of course, there's lots of examples where, you don't give up, you keep going, you pivot, and that's fine too. That really just depends on kind of what you feel like. So I guess my only like test for that is, and this is how I decide for myself. And if I'm talking to other founders, which I've done a lot in kind of similar situations, it really comes down to what do you want to do? And like, if you want to pivot, if you want to try something else, then do that, but don't do it if it's not what you want. You think that somebody else wants it. You think that you owe it to somebody else. Then don't. That's a very big red flag. So like, what do you want? And try to answer that honestly.
And I'm sure you've had a situation with Evernote also, where you just at one point decided, that's it. I want to move on from that role, right? Related to that, mental health. What are some of the signs to look out for aspiring young founders that pour their heart and souls and tears and blood into a new company or a new product? To maybe put more balance into one's time.
Shouldn't require that much blood, so that's a warning sign if you feel like you're putting too much blood into it. Tears sometimes, yeah. I mean, look, I think I kind of look at it like this, and it took me a long time to realize this. I wish I'd figured this out sooner. Imagine you're like a world-class skier. Like you're great at skiing. You're like 20 years old and you're like an Olympic level skier. I'm not. I've been skiing once in my life. I'm definitely never going again. But let's say you're a great skier and you're skiing, jumps and bumps, and everyone knows you're an amazing skier. And when you're doing that, you're kind of screwing up your knees, right? Because there's like a lot of bumping and like, it's not very good for your knees, but like, you're 20 and you're really good, so you do it. And you understand that you're screwing up your knees, and so you try to take care of them. But ultimately, there's some damage being done. That's just how it is. And everyone understands that. Let's say you're 50 now, and you've been skiing for 30 years like this. No one expects that at 50 you're a better skier than you were when you were 20. No one is like, oh, but you've got 30 more years of experience skiing, you must be so amazing. And you're like, well, yeah, in some senses, maybe you're a better skier at 50 than at 20 because you do know some things. But in a very real sense, like, you just don't have the same knees. You can't ski the same way. You've had 30 years of damage to your knees. And people think, oh, well, that makes sense because, knees are hardware. So of course, you can't do the same thing. So if you're going to ski at 50, you're skiing differently than you did when you were 20. Because it's not controversial, because people think, yeah, knees are hardware, they get damaged. But somehow people think that, and our culture thinks that your brain is software. That like knees are hardware, but brain is software. But your brain's not software. Your brain is the same thing as your knees. There's nothing magical about it. It also gets banged up and damaged. And we like entrepreneurs, startup founders, we learn a lot of bad habits, especially ones that do it early, that started like early in our 20s. I started my first company when I was 18, I think. We learn a lot of bad habits about, how hard you push yourselves, how traumatic it is, how stressed out, how you deal with it. And it's very hard. Like being a founder, being a CEO, running a company is a very damaging thing. Just like being an Olympic skier, it really damages your brain. But since people think that, well, the brain is software, you just kind of assume that when you get older, you get better at it. And so people say, I'm almost 50 now. I'm going to be 50 in a few months. And we're like, oh, this is like your fifth company. It's my fifth company. It must be so much easier. It must be so much better. I'm like, no, it's much harder. Because my brain has had 30 years of the trauma of running companies, which is a real thing. And I didn't understand that until 5-6 years ago. Like, I also bought into this idea that, like, yeah, it's just, you just learn how to do it, you do it better. But like, yeah, you learn how to do it, you do it better, but you have to do it differently when you're 50. You can't be the same CEO when you're 50 that you were when you were 20. You can't even do it at 30. You have to do it differently. And it's not a question of like warning signs to look for. It's 100% inevitable that running a company is a brutally difficult thing that causes damage. So you have to do, I think to that, there's like 3 things that I kind of take away from it. One is don't do it. Seriously. Like, you don't have to ski. Certainly don't do it for something stupid. Like, if you're gonna do this, do it for something like that you really feel is like fundamentally important, that the world really needs, that it's worth the damage, because there's going to be damage. So don't do it unless you willingly say it's worth it. That's kind of the most important thing. The second thing is, like, understand that you are hurting yourself, and take care, just like you would if you were an athlete, just like you would if you were skiing. You can't completely reverse the damage, you can't prevent it, but you can be smart about it. You can try to be healthy, you can try to take care of yourself. Don't wait until you have a problem. You're having the problem now, and try to take care. And then the third thing is, as time goes on, just understand that you have to CEO differently. You just like you can't ski the same way. You can't CEO the same way. You have to have different approaches, different strategies, different tactics. You can't do the stuff that you were doing in your 20s, in your 30s and 40s and beyond. And this is something that no one told me about, but I wish I'd known. I wish I'd figured this out 20 years before I did.
And lastly, from my side, would you take some of those, different CEOing ways, and even recommend those ways for younger people?
I think if you just know that it's going to be different, and you think about how it's going to be different, one very specific way, which is how much you do yourself. And I think when I was younger, I was much more used to doing a lot more myself, because I was pretty good at a few things, and it was okay. I just assumed that it was okay if I was just going to do a lot of the stuff myself. I'm just going to brute force do it myself. I took some pride in it, and now I can't. Like, there's just like I can't do the same amount of stuff myself, because I used to be able to stay up 72 hours in a row and not sleep, and it was fine. And now, like, that would just be very bad. I can't do that, which means that I have to make sure that I spend a lot more time making sure that I have a team that's much better than I am, than the stuff I could do myself. And so at this company, and even in my previous company, like, I spent far more time thinking about how I could get people and how I could help advance them, people that were much better than I could possibly be at their job, because that was the only way to be scalable. But that would have been difficult in my 20s. Like, in my 20s, it would have actually been very difficult to attract people who were much better than me, because A, why would they want to work for me? And B, like, how would I even know? I hadn't had the experience of like knowing what excellent looks like. So it's probably okay in, your first time in your 20s to just be a hero and try to do stuff yourself. Just understand that, like, okay, at some point you can't be the hero anymore. It has to be about getting other people, and the other people have to be better than you, not almost as good. And that's a different skill set.